I had kind of mentioned, like, over the weekend, like, I really didn't do a lot, right? So all I pretty much did over the weekend was, well, actually Saturday was really busy, but I want to specifically talk about Sunday, because Sunday I didn't really do a lot. So I had been hearing through the grapevine that there was this new show, new limited series on Netflix called Adolescence. It was a 4-part series about this little boy that basically unalives one of his classmates, and they're trying to figure out why. And so I watched it, and I'm so sorry, spoiler alert, y'all. This was a really, really well done series. So I highly recommend you go watch it, because that series, granted, it was done in another country. I believe it was in England. But regardless, the reason why that was such a good the reason why that was such a good limited series is because it highlighted the way in which men view women even at a young age. So basically the premise, like I said, is this boy unalives one of his students, or one of his classmates, and the classmate just so happens to be a girl. So the first episode is done, and we see the boy get arrested. We see him get booked into the police station. He's sitting in a cell, and you feel bad for him because he keeps saying, I didn't do anything, I'm innocent. And then basically towards the end of the episode, he's in the interrogation room with his father, and the detectives keep asking him, what did you do? Why did you do this? And he keeps up his innocence, saying, I didn't do anything. Then they show the video. He was caught on CCTV stabbing his classmate, who happens to be a young girl. And it's violent. It is incredibly violent. So then we go to episode 2. Episode 2 is about how the detectives are now at the school that both kids went to, trying to figure out if anybody at the school knows what's going on. And basically, you see the best friend of the girl, who's incredibly upset. But also one of the detective's sons, he goes to the school. And this is where it gets really interesting, because, and this was a new term to me, basically, the son says that the girl called out the boy that killed her on Instagram, and basically is like, she called him out for being an incel, which is not something that I knew about. So an incel is pretty much a guy that feels like they're never going to find their partner, and so they pretty much leverage misogyny and hatred and basically bag on women, right? And they hate women and all this other stuff. This boy had already proclaimed himself to that kind of life at 13 years old. And basically, the girl called him out, and she rejected him. Okay? Now, mind you, the girl rejects this boy, calls him out on Instagram. So then we go to episode 3, where the boy is talking to a child psychologist to really understand what he did and why he did it. And it was hard to watch. Episode 3 was the hardest to watch out of all of them. But basically, he keeps referencing this girl as a bully bitch, and is under the impression that she was bullying him. And that's why he killed her, basically, because he was being bullied, right? And then episode 4 is basically the aftermath of the family, because he had a father, a mother, and an older sister. And now they are having to deal with what he did from their side, and it's the father's birthday. And they also do find out too that the boy is being charged as an adult, and he's going to plead guilty, which means he's probably going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And like I said, this was an incredibly done series, and I highly recommend going and watching it. Here's why it triggered me. It triggered me for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, it's the reminder that this universal hatred of women is universal. It triggered me because there was a young girl who called a boy out for who he really was, and she got killed for it. And also that some men, boys, truly feel that if they are rejected, that they have the right to violate a woman's body and her space and her existence. And that was incredibly frustrating to watch. Like, and I say that because I have had my own experiences with bullying when I was younger, mainly with boys. And like, I used to get beat up by boys a lot when I was younger. To the point where there was one specific incident where I was walking home, and I think this happened in the 7th grade. And my 7th grade English teacher used to let me walk home early. So she used to let me leave early. Well, the boys caught up with me. And they grabbed my gym bag. And they opened my gym bag, threw my stuff all over. And my shoes, my gym shoes, they threw down a storm drain. And I remember running home. And my dad was home. My dad was never home at that time at like 3 o'clock, 3:30. And I'm crying, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Nothing." And he's like, "What is it? Why is your gym bag all messed up?" And I was like, "They took my gym bag and they stole my shoes." And my dad's like, "Who?" You know? And I told them what happened. So my dad was like, "Get in the car." So my dad got in the car and went back to where everything happened. The boys were still there. And my dad ran up on the curb and was like, "Don't none of y'all leave. Where are my daughter's shoes?" And my dad made the boys open up the manhole cover and get down and go get my shoes. And he basically told them, "Don't you ever put your hands on my daughter again. Like, I don't care." And I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, like, these boys are really going to come after me now. After that, I was never bullied again. But thinking about everything that like I went through, first and foremost, the girl in the show rejected a boy. I didn't reject any boys. I was just there. But to them, I was weak. So to them, I was an easy target to get beat up, right? So that's part one. Part two, that's one instance. There were other instances where I like physically got beat up. I remember getting thrown into a snowbank. I remember getting pushed and landing on my wrists and scratching up my wrists. I remember just the fear of having to walk home by myself because it was just me. And, you know, when we think about bodies being violated, female bodies being violated, we often think of them in a sexual way. That violation being in a sexual way. I wasn't violated sexually. I was violated in that I didn't even get the peace that I deserved to walk home. And these boys felt that it was okay to pick on me. And I think it's so crazy how most girls are bullied by other girls. I wasn't bullied by other girls. I was bullied by fucking boys. So watching Adolescence hit me hard because that hatred for girls, that hatred for me is over 20 years old, you know, and this is something that happened in the late 90s. It is 2025. And granted, this was a fictional series, but things like this happen to girls a lot. That is why girlhood is so difficult on so many different angles, and it sucks. And seeing how that boy just annihilated and just beat on that girl and violated her was really hard to watch. And it took me back to a place that I haven't been in over 20 years. Okay, actually, I did actually go back to that place a few years ago because one of my bullies actually reached out and apologized to me. And I think the number one thing that I got from that whole the show was recognizing my childhood trauma, and there are still some things that maybe I even need to work through. But I think also understanding why it is so important to teach boys the importance of respecting girls. And that if a girl rejects you, it doesn't give you pause and agency to violate her under any circumstance. And you would think that in 2025 we wouldn't have to say that out loud, but we do.